Conjunctions. Conjunctions join words or phrases or clauses or groups of words, and just in general, conjunctions join words or groups of words. Okay, coordinating conjunctions, we'll start with those. They're also known as fanboys. Not because that's what their technical name is, it's just an easy way to remember them. So sometimes we use acronyms to remember things. You know, those things that have the first letter of every word in what you want to remember stands for something. Well, that's what we have here. First letter of fanboys. First letter of each of these letters stands for the first letter of one of the coordinating conjunctions. So F is for, and A is for and, N is for nor, B is for but, O is for or, Y is for yet, and S is for so. Okay, so joining two words, Jim and John. Or, for example, you might join groups of words. All right, so we want to both, if you think about these being two different things, get good grades would be one, and two would be learn a lot. So we want to both get good grades and learn a lot. So we have and joining get good grades and learn a lot. Or you could also use it to one of these to join clauses. All right, so the teacher was very demanding. That's an independent clause. Yet I learned a lot from her. That's another independent clause. You always join independent clauses when you join independent clauses with a conjunction, coordinating conjunction. Put a comma before the coordinating conjunction. Okay. We also have the other common kind of conjunction that you'll need to know about and how to use, called subordinating conjunctions. I'll give you a few after, because, since, while. We certainly have a big list in our textbook, but here's a few. And I'll give you a couple more because I'm going to use until and unless in examples. So what these do is these start a clause, but if they're used before, used at the beginning of a clause, they're subordinating conjunctions. And so they create a subordinate clause, which means the clause can't not stand by itself. It will not be a complete sentence if it's just a clause that starts with one of these. So after, I was going to use until. Okay, so here's an example. I won't leave until she comes home. All right, so we have the subordinating conjunction here. Until she comes home is the subordinate clause. So a subordinating conjunction starts a subordinate clause. So if it doesn't start a subordinate clause, it's not a subordinating conjunction. Maybe it's a preposition or something else. So until she comes home is a subordinate clause. It cannot stand by itself, right? So we have to have an independent clause go with it. I won't leave is an independent clause. So now we have a complete thought since we have an independent clause in the sentence and it flows correctly with the subordinate clause. There's no comma before a subordinate clause, most of them anyway. No comma here. But there would be a comma if you started the sentence with a subordinate clause, like unless you study more. If we go into a subordinate clause, if we go into the independent clause, we're going to have to offset the main idea. That is grammatically speaking, an independent clause is the main thought. So we're going to start with the incomplete thought, and then we're going to put a comma before the main thought. Alright, so you won't be accepted into college is a complete thought. Putting a comma right there before it because it comes out of an incomplete thought. It's like an introductory element. Sometimes we have introductory phrases. In this case, it's an introductory clause, comma, and then your main clause. Or subordinate clause, comma, main clause. Alright, so the general rule of thumb is you start with an independent clause and you finish with a subordinate clause. You don't put a comma between them. But if you start with a subordinate clause and you end with an independent clause, you do put a comma before the independent clause. If you added on, if you wanted to have more clauses in there, you could subordinate clause, independent clause, subordinate clause. But notice just like this one comes from a subordinate to an independent, subordinate to an independent. So that's subordinate clause, comma, independent clause, and you still leave this pattern here. Let's say you wanted to start with an independent clause. Well, after an independent clause, there's no comma. So it's just like that, and we still have a comma before the independent here. If we had 3 clauses in the sentence, there's a couple of examples that you could use. Okay, well, that's it on conjunctions for today.